Well, welcome everybody to the 21st monthly half-hour program of the Financing Philadelphia's Future series of public Zoom discussions. My name is Peter Winslow. I'm a member of the Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition that presents these programs for you. And I'm a candidate recommended by the City Council to Mayor Kenny for appointment to the initial board of directors of the Philadelphia Public Financial Authority, which will be the precursor to our municipal public bank. I'm filling in for our program host and discussion moderator, Vanessa Lowe, who cannot be with us today. We look forward to Vanessa's return for our next month's show on November 29th. Our guest today is Reverend Gregory Holston. I'll introduce Reverend Holston in a minute, following some housekeeping reminders and updates. It's a half-hour program and it goes by quickly. We begin and end on schedule. Our conversation is inclusive, interactive, and ongoing. We welcome your questions, comments, and suggestions offline as well as today. Please use the hand raise feature if you wish to be recognized, and remember to mute when you're not speaking. We encourage you to use the chat feature for questions and comments. If you wish to be on our forum contact list, please put your email in the chat. Remember that you can save the chat at the end of the program by clicking on the three dots located below the dialog box. We don't have anybody on by phone, so I can ignore those instructions and give my thanks to Susan Windle for monitoring the chat and Tim Brown for our technical support today. And special thanks to Nicole Levy, who is joining me in discussion with Reverend Holston. But before we begin, Susan, is Mayor Kenny or his representative here with us today? Susan, are you there? Stan, do you see Mayor Kenny in the room?
I did not see him.
No. Well, Tim, please display the empty chair that we've reserved for him. Thank you. We invited Mayor Kenny to participate in this Financing Philadelphia's Future. In fact, we've issued an open invitation to the mayor to participate in our discussions, which he has so far declined. The PPPC sent an open letter to the mayor, which he ignored. Candidates recommended by the City Council to the mayor for appointment to the initial board of directors of the PPFA sent 5 private email messages to the mayor, which he ignored. On October 7th, the PPBC served a people's subpoena on Mayor Kenny, calling for him to appear at the PPBC People's Economic Forum to address his refusal to implement ordinance number 210956 to establish the PPFA. The forum, Tim, if you can put up the forum slide. The forum will be held on Thursday. I guess we don't have that, but the forum will be held on Thursday, November 17th from 7 o'clock to 8:30 on Zoom at a Zoom link that will be put in the chat. The general public is invited to attend this discussion, which will focus on issues related to housing in Philadelphia. And housing, specifically the legacy of historic and continuing redlining in Philadelphia, is among the subjects we want to discuss with Reverend Holston today. Greg Holston is Senior Advisor on Advocacy and Policy for the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. He's also Chairman of the Criminal Justice Reform and Violence Prevention Committee for the Black Clergy of Philadelphia and vicinity. Greg, you're there in your car?
Yes, right outside the church where we'll be having our meeting tonight.
Well, Greg, the PPFA and the coalition seeks to take on the most critical and difficult problems facing our city. And right now, we're suffering from rampant gun violence, especially in neighborhoods that were historically redlined and even now being de facto redlined. Can you explain to the audience the 57 block initiative and preview tonight's citywide meeting?
Thank you. I would love to do that. I think, first of all, credit goes to the Philadelphia Inquirer for their newspaper article from September of 2021, along with our controller, who also saw the link between redlining and areas that have been historically redlined and the pattern of the most concentrated gun violence in our city. The Inquirer article brought out that from 2015 to 2021, there had been 57 blocks that had 10 or more shootings. Always pause for a minute to get that into people's spirit. 10 or more shootings. 10 times they saw people laying on the ground in blood on their block where there were children. And some those blocks as much as 18 to 20 times. And within that period of 2015 to 2021. And that Inquirer article found out that 53 out of 57 of those blocks were in redlined areas. That means areas that were marked for disinvestment from the 1930s. The red line map from 1937, which was the red line was basically the racial line. Red line was put around the areas that were traditionally Black and brown in the 1930s. And many of those areas have remained such over these many years. And what was found, as many of you understand, when you're redlined, that the ability to be able to obtain mortgages, the ability to be able to have your house appraised properly, the ability to be able to build wealth, because owning a home is the number one way people build wealth. That basic ability to be able to do that has been denied Black and brown people in the city by law intentionally since from 1930 till the early to the late 1970s, and de facto by practice and by pattern from the 1970s till today. And it's that disinvestment that is driving poverty, that makes Philadelphia the poorest big city in the country, and drives so many of the factors that lead to gun violence in our city, that they correctly made the link. And we are developing a gun violence prevention strategy that takes that link and begins to say we can do some real things in our city to make change around that. And if we're really sincere about ending gun violence, it's more than just simply telling young people to put the guns down. That's part of it. But it is changing the environment, the place that they live and they've grown up at, into a place where all people can live in health and wealth and prosperity.
So, Reverend Holston, you've identified really a systemic problem that has deep roots, historic roots, and is going to affect almost everything that happens in Philadelphia and to the welfare of our people. Nicole, will you come in this conversation and shed some light in terms of some of the things that you've observed?
Well, I mean, I think my question for Reverend Holston, where I'm really interested, is you've been having a lot of these conversations now across Philadelphia, meeting with people and really talking about this connection between systemic racialized disinvestment in certain communities and how that impacts things like gun violence. I think my first question is really kind of twofold. One, how are those conversations going, right? This isn't information that's traditionally taught in schools. Is it easy? Is it a lot of legwork to pull together this information? How are people receiving it? And then the second question is, once they do, like once you kind of get that connection between big issues like gun violence and a persistent history of redlining, what does that mean for people? What does that activate?
It's very interesting, the kinds of responses. For some, it's like the light has hit them. Oh, this is why our neighborhoods are the way they are. This is why the poverty is there. This is why our streets are the way they are. This is why our homes are the way they are. This is why our schools are the way they are. I thought for some Black people, they're saying to themselves, I thought something was wrong with us. And for some, who blame themselves and blame their communities for the condition of their communities, it has been a revelation to be able to know that this structure put in place intentionally by people who practice white supremacy, it is still affecting your community today. And you're not fault. You may be responsible for making the change, but you're not at fault yourself. And so for some, it's been a revelation. Some people had to fight with it because they've struggled to deal with the complexity of it. And for others, it's just, especially those who are not Black and brown, it's been a struggle to even accept.
Thank you.
And
And
it's
then,
an impediment to intergenerational wealth creation as a result of all this, hasn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Because again, your home is how you, and your home properly appraised is how you increase wealth. I often tell the story of my aunt, who was a owner of a restaurant in the 1960s and made some of the best cakes and pies you would ever want to taste. But she owned that restaurant and could never get the financing necessary to build that business. She later went in and developed alcoholism, and after some long illness passed away. But the despair and the depression that happens when you can't live your dreams because you don't have access to capital that home ownership could possibly give you is a quiet killer in the Black community, and it has happened in the Black community much by this intentional practice over these last 80 years.
And the banks aren't really helping the way they should, are they, Nicole? Some of the things that you found.
I mean, I think that's one of the things I often think about my own process of coming to an aha moment of growing up like white and in the suburbs and watching gun violence on the news and having an opinion as a kid about it, right? About like, well, why is that? Like, why aren't they doing more to help themselves? Like really ignorant views, right? And the process of really having to learn this history, and I've been doing economic justice work for almost 20 years now, so I often think of this as an early aha moment, but I realize how much it's still evolving to this day, like learning new information. And I think Reverend Holston, you talk about the historic redlining maps from the 1930s, right? Which is, I think, something that a lot of people know about or hear about, but then you start to learn about other sort of, I think what you would call de facto, like Jim Crow of the North. That's been happening persistently since then. We think about things like the GI Bill and just the flood of subsidies for home ownership and education and business development that floods into white communities at the same time that we have the Housing Act and sort of urban renewal policies that are like using eminent domain to take houses from Black communities. And it's like, as you start to layer on this history, the scale and scope of harm becomes just devastating. It's sort of astronomical. And I think, as you know, my research really focuses primarily on modern day redlining with banks. Like we can look at data from 2020. And Tim, I don't know if you can pull up, we have one sort of picture that shows a point in time snapshot, just 1 year of what's happening in Philadelphia today. Just the disparity. So if we look at all of the home loans that were made in Philadelphia in 2021, you can see that 47% of them went to white borrowers, 34% went to other, but just 18% of all the mortgage loans in Philadelphia went to Black borrowers. And we know that the demographics of the city look like it's equally Black and white. So if we imagine, if for a second, just imagine a world without this kind of systemic racism in just lending, we're just talking about lending here, Black communities would have received $1 billion more in home loans in 1 year alone. Reverend Holston had asked us to sort of just pause and let the sort of 18 to 20 shootings sort of sink in, like, let the scale of this sink in. Every year, Black communities in Philadelphia are being asked to get by, to improve their homes, to live in their communities with 1 billion less, right? And that's just a 1 year snapshot. So I guess, I mean, Peter had kind of asked me to share some of that, but I think my question back to Reverend Holston is really one of, how do we grapple with these numbers? And like, what's the importance of getting a handle on the magnitude of this harm, and what do we do with it? Where do we go from there in your conversations? How are people thinking about the scale of harm and how we heal as a city?
Um, it's powerful. Well, I think unless we understand the full scale, as you correctly have called it, and I've used the same phrase, that this is the Jim Crow of the North. This is the way racial segregation, white supremacy has practiced its and has extracted wealth from the Black community in this way. And so we have to understand it for what it is and the magnitude of that extraction. And so once you understand that, and then you recognize that gun violence has gone up in the last 3 years to highest heights that it's been, but it's been a problem over these last 50 years. We've averaged 362 homicides each year for the last 50 years. That it's a chronic problem that is directly related to this lack of investment and a lack of wealth in the Black and brown community. Then you know that only way you really can solve gun violence, the only way you can really end the gun violence in our community is by using the practices of reinvestment, of putting more dollars back into the community to rebuild our schools, rebuild our institutions, rebuild our home stock, rebuild our neighborhoods, rebuild our streets, and make them the kinds of places that all of us would want to live in and be a part of. And that's the way you end gun violence. When you see it in that pattern, then these little issues about a DA policy or little issues about other matters seem pale in comparison to the real issues that we're trying to address.
So Reverend Holston, we have a question in the chat from San Shapiro, essentially asking whether the response that we're receiving from the powers that be, from the big banks, is adequate. Specifically, Wells Fargo is apparently implementing a program to provide down payment subsidies to prospective Black homeowners. JP Morgan Chase has a similar program, and a big one nationwide that doesn't hit Philadelphia. Do you think that makes up for the previous decades of redlining?
Absolutely not. And but I do want to say the banks reacted to this government policy and took advantage to make as much profit as it possibly could. They certainly have a major responsibility when just Philadelphia alone, $1 billion a year has been extracted over these last 80, 90 years. But government itself, who set these practices up, bear a great deal of the responsibility as well. And all of us must come to the table together to really look at this and examine and dismantle this Jim Crow of the North so that we all can build the kind of communities. So I don't put it all on banks, even though they profited off it. I just recognize that we need to have a much, much, much larger solution.
So last Saturday, Tim, can you put up that photo that I took? I watched student protesters occupy Franklin Field at halftime in the Penn Yale homecoming game because of the UC townhomes dispute. Can we discuss that situation? That's a real life problem that it seems to me is going to recur over and over again as Section 8 properties come onto the open market.
Brian Stevenson said that slavery hasn't ended, it's merely evolved. And it evolved into Jim Crow, it evolved to lynchings, it evolved into what we've talked about so far, redlining and the disinvestment in Black and brown communities. Another evolving pattern of extracting wealth from Black and brown communities is gentrification, and gentrification with displacement. And so the UC townhomes have become a symbol of that gentrification with displacement as they try to pull Black and brown peoples out of homes that they've lived in some 30, 40 years. Really the remnant of the community that was there, that was the Black Bottom, that was destroyed many years ago by the things that was done at the University of Pennsylvania and others to gentrify that community. And so now we need to make a stand about, are we going to have gentrification continue the practice of redlining, continue the practice of racial discrimination, continue the practice of driving and drawing and taking of wealth out of Black and brown communities? Or are we going to stop it? Are we going to say, can we build a community where we all can live together and live as brothers and sisters? That is part of the struggle that's being stated by those UC townhome protests.
Well, the problem that we see with the UC townhomes is the tip of the iceberg. We're going to have more
Yes.
of these situations that come along. We need an organization like the PPFA that will anticipate this and have programs in place to provide housing for people as there's a changeover in the ownership of these properties.
The importance of a public bank and using our dollars for our people, on all of our people in the city of Philadelphia, is just monumental. The issues we've already discussed about redlining are quite show that, but also these issues in terms of displacing or stopping the displacement of individuals. The public bank could be a wonderful tool to use the resources of the city to build the kind of city we want to have for everyone.
Nicole, do you have thoughts on this?
I think one of the last question that's lingering in my mind kind of goes back to what you were saying, Reverend Holston, about the banks playing a big part of the problem, but it not being sort of just squarely on those shoulders, and really the importance of bringing everyone to the table. And I think that's something that's so powerful about the work you're doing now and the work that you're about to do. Thank you for joining us, by the way, but in just a very short moment of really hosting a citywide meeting to talk about these issues and bring them to the ground. Or I should say, bring them to the forefront of everyone's minds. I guess I'm just curious, how has it been? It's the same question. How have those conversations been going for you? Like, I think we do need to bring banks to the table. We need to bring everyone to the table and say, this problem is all of ours, right? It's not necessarily finger pointing, but hey, we're all staring at this problem. Where do we go from here? Are you feeling hopeful? Have the conversations been going well?
I think many of our conversations have been with community leaders first, just making sure we tell this story as much as we can, and we'll continue those conversations after this kind of introduction of those 57 blocks gun violence strategy tonight. We have not had that many discussions with institutions yet, and I look forward to those conversations. I believe if we are really sincere about really building the kind of city in which we all can prosper, then government, philanthropy, banks, investors, all can come together around the table where it's possible for them to make money, at the same time build a city where Black and brown and white can live together and be able to go to quality schools together and have quality neighborhoods. I hope that's the hope and prayer. I know that people want to live in those kinds of communities. They want to be in integrated communities. They want to be able to live with Black culture and brown culture and all kinds of different ethnic groups. We want to have that as a people. That ought to be some way in which we can reinvest in Black and brown communities, large sums of dollars, that it makes profit for everyone and builds the Black and brown communities in a stronger way. I am hopeful that we'll find that path. We'll find that path together.
Dan has his hand up.
Yeah, it's, Susan alerts me that Deb Feigert has a question also. We took the question from Stan before. I know he's got a follow-up, but we're sort of running out of time. Deb, can you give your question?
Yeah, Reverend Holston, just as a follow-up to what you and Nicole have been chatting about, what other things besides bringing all of those folks to the table, and I'm so glad you included investors / developers who have got to be brought to the table. What other things can we do to try and increase Black and brown wealth, particularly Black wealth in communities. I was wondering if you were in favor of reparations from places like Penn in West Philly, or even federally, or something like Senator Booker's baby bonds proposal.
I'm in favor of reparations. I believe there's a process to it. And the process first is speaking the truth. We got to speak the truth about our history. And so many people today want to fight and have us not be able to speak the truth about our history. But we got to speak the truth about our history, the history of redlining, history of disinvestment in Black and brown communities. There needs to be some admission of wrongdoing by institutions. Penn has been a part of that. I mean, they have some wrongdoing that they have done that they need to admit to, and have some of their $15 billion in an endowment is a part of the wealth they have accumulated because of that. And then we need to talk seriously. How do we repair that? How do we repair the damage that has been caused by this disinvestment in Black and brown communities? I don't always use the word reparations because it kind of scares people. When people think about when you hurt someone, that you need to repair them. You need to repair the damage. We have it as a part of our legal structure, but we also have it as part of our common sense that you don't hurt somebody and not try to repair the damage. We need to take that same kind of step together. And then we need to reimagine a better world and a better way and a better way of doing this so that we all can live together. I'm hopeful as a man of faith. I am hopeful that we can find that process together and that we can be honest about it together. And that we're all here and on this call are helping us be able to speak that broad, big truth of what damage has been done. And that'll lead us to the path of real reconciliation and discovering a better world for all of us.
Thank you so much, Reverend Holston. What a wonderful thing to leave on an optimistic note. So thank you, Reverend Holston, and thank you, Nicole. This half hour goes by quickly. The discussion of the housing crisis and the potential for the PPFA to address it, the commodification of housing, will continue at the People's Economic Forum on November 17th. I hope everybody will participate in that. Be a very good hour and a half of our time. Also, please attend the second quarterly meeting of the PPFA Working Group this Friday, October 28th from 11:30 to 12:30 on Zoom at the link that's in the chat. Remember, you can save the chat by clicking on the three dots located below the dialog box. Vote if you haven't already. Go Phillies, beat Houston, fly Eagles. We look forward to seeing you back here on November 29th for the 22nd episode of Financing Philadelphia's Future. Thank you for participating today.
Hope to see you tonight as well at 57 blocks.
Everyone still has 1 hour to make it over to the to 19th Street.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.